COVID-19, quarantines, watch lists, 14 days, no, 7 days. It's the weekend. Welcome to Arm Wrestling with COVID-19 in London, and this is number 33. A family friend of mine had been to Croatia on holiday, and they managed to get back to the United Kingdom just in the nick of time to avoid having to quarantine for 14 days. The father, the husband of the family, was very, very happy because he's a medical doctor and he had to go to work. Conversely, another family had gone to Paris on holiday. The husband had actually gone to Paris, and the rest of the family, the wife and the children, had gone to the south of France. The husband got back again in the nick of time and avoided the quarantine, whereas the children returned and had to stay in self-confinement for 14 days before going out. And as far as the mother, the wife, is concerned, she came later, but what she did was go to a French medical institute to get a test, a PCR, that she's COVID-free. Took that with her in order to see whether that would work in this country. She's a teacher. She wanted to go back to school now that the schools have started. And she was told, no, sorry, you came back from France, you have to quarantine for 14 days. These are only two examples. I can give you other examples of friends and acquaintances or colleagues of mine who have found themselves in the same situation. And we're not only talking about people who go to Croatia, who go to France, who go to Belgium, to Portugal, to, I don't know, wherever else this quarantine applies or will apply in the future. But it also applies to the UK within our four nations as well. I mean, let me give you just a couple of examples. A second cousin of mine lives in Leeds. She and her husband were quite comfortable, slowly venturing out to do the shopping, etc., etc. And then suddenly, was it yesterday or the day before, that we were told that Leeds now, the number of cases has ramped up, and therefore Leeds is also on the watch list. And who knows, if the numbers do not level out, then Leeds might also be in quarantine. So she sent me a message, which I thought was quite nice, with one of those sad emojis in the message, because of course it means that her and her husband's adventures outside the house might become more circumscribed these days than they had hoped for. So whether we're talking within the UK itself or we're talking about people going abroad and taking a risk, basically taking a risk of going there, not knowing whether they would have to come back and quarantine or not, it has become, as one commentator was saying, really like the lottery. You never know what numbers you would get. But I wouldn't put it, I wouldn't compare it to the lottery. I would compare it more to the weather forecast. Here in the UK, we're famous that we can never tell from one day to the other, less so these days, but still, bear with me, be patient. The weather can change dramatically. One day it could be dry, it could even be warm, and then the next day you would get a depression, you would get storms or whatever. And we in the UK are famous for having the weather as one of our most social and sociable items of conversation. So I think that COVID-19 has become a little bit like the weather forecast. You can never tell from one day to the other, and you have to be prepared. And that basically raises a question with me. I was listening to a program in which one person who had gone to Europe on holiday and suddenly found himself bound to be quarantined when back, he was saying, this is unacceptable. The government is seesawing. The government is changing its opinion all the time. Well, guess what? I would believe and I would accept that the government has been seesawing a lot and has been flip-flopping a lot. But when it comes to this, I think the government is doing the best it can. And in addition, what I would say is that we need to use some common sense. Listen, those who know me know that I used to spend a lot of my time traveling, whether traveling for conferences and meetings and business, or just traveling on holiday, going and meeting friends, spending time with my partner, etc., etc. I can't do all that now. Of course I can. I can go and buy a ticket and go, but I will be taking the risk of suddenly finding myself outside the zone, as it were, and having to come back and being even more self-confined than I am and that I've been for the past 5-6 months. So what do? I have a choice. I either take the risk and calculate what does that risk mean when I come back. What do those 14 days of confinement mean if I were to be subject to them? Or alternatively, I decide not to go away. I decide to stay in the country. I decide to stay in the city, to do other things, to say, okay, it's 1 year in my life, one summer season in my life. Let me basically put up with it. I mean, COVID-19 is an awful business. It's an awful virus that has really, really infiltrated itself into our psyches. And instead of thinking, perhaps that's a suggestion from me today at the weekend, instead of thinking, when will the vaccine come out? When will we rid ourselves of this dreaded virus? When will we get back to some normality again? Perhaps the question that we should begin to ask ourselves is, how do we adapt ourselves to the virus and to the reality of the virus impacting our lives day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out? Don't rely on the government entirely. It gives you its weather forecast, and then it might come back and say, I've got to change the weather forecast. Think sensibly, think with some common sense, and please don't grumble if you go away and then the government changes its regulations. It is not doing it because they want to do it. I mean, listen, the travel industry is in a very uncertain situation. I heard recently that 124,500, say over 120,000 job losses are imminent or are happening as we speak. I mean, when I go up and down the high street and I look at my own travel agent, where I used to spend half my time there buying tickets and changing tickets, in the past, in the glorious days pre-COVID-19, pre-February and March of 2020, when I pass by the travel agent, and it's one of the big ones, it's empty. Half the people are still furloughed. There are only 2 or 3 people behind their computers. So these people are also losing their livelihoods. And it is an uncertain situation. So instead of grumbling, let us calculate, let us think, let us project forward and say, okay, if I go and this happens, how does it impact me, my family, my job, my work, my circumstances? Am I being too reasonable at the weekend? Probably, but this is just an intuitive thought. It's just something that call it blue sky thinking, call it whatever you want to call it. But we are living in unusual circumstances, and much as I have a whole list of complaints about the way the government and its ministers have dealt with COVID-19 in this country, one of the most developed countries in the world, since its inception, between inverted commas, in March, I still think that they have been trying to do the best they can in some way in facing up to unforeseen circumstances. And it's not only in the UK. I mean, it's in the UK, yes, we've had terrible numbers. We have well over 40,000 deaths. That's awful. And no matter how you sort of interpret that, oh no, you know, it wasn't all COVID, the death certificate says this, the death certificate says that. Yes, we lost a lot of people, whether in care homes, whether in hospitals, whether at home, whether elsewhere, we did. But we're not alone in this. I look around me across the whole of Europe, and it's the same. And I also look further afield. I look to my old stomping grounds. I look to the MENA and Gulf region. And what do I see there? I see the same thing as well. For instance, what I learned recently was that the confirmed death toll from the coronavirus has gone well over 50,000 deaths in the Middle East. And this is according to numbers by Associated Press that relies on official numbers offered by health authorities across the region. And to be honest with you, they say 50,000. I don't buy it. I think there's far more than 50,000 deaths in the MENA region. And this is an undercount. Why? For a simple reason. One, these countries are famous for understating numbers. So if they tell you one number, you have to inflate it usually. And the other thing is because some of these countries are in a state of flux, in a state of war. Do you really think that they have the resources to give you statistics or to give the health authorities or Associated Press the statistics for it? So look, for instance, look at Libya. Libya in a state of war, East fighting West, one group of militias fighting another army, the proxies coming in and out as if it's basically a corridor for world powers. Libya, Yemen, I really, really feel sad for Yemen. Yemen is in a very bad shape. And basically, we've run Yemen to the ground. And the numbers, the resources remain extremely limited. But the UN and other agencies have told us that the situation in that war-ravaged country, in Libya, in Yemen, in Syria, do you honestly believe that you get the right numbers coming out of Syria? Even in Iraq, do you get the right numbers? I have friends of mine who are journalists and church workers and other people in Iraq. Do they really get the right numbers? And if we forget those countries and we consider Iran as part of this group, I think Iran is the hardest hit nation. I mean, it saw the region's first major outbreak, didn't it? I mean, over 20,000 people have died there from the virus. Over almost 400,000 confirmed cases. They say 300,000 recoveries. I don't know. So Iran, Syria, Libya, Yemen, Iraq, Palestine, Gaza. I dread to think what will happen in Gaza. When I heard that things were getting a bit iffy, I said, uh-oh, we're going to be in for a rough ride here. But even if we go to the Gulf with all those oodles of money that the Gulf monarchies have, take the United Arab Emirates, for instance, which has been very much in the news recently because of the normalization with Israel. So I'm using it as an example, but as an appropriate example because it has embarked on a mass testing campaign, but it saw its highest daily figures confirmed cases, the count confirmed over the last 3 months. And this happened just as the schools have reopened in Dubai and across the Emirate, but largely in Dubai. And it is now introducing itself as a tourist destination. So in a sense, what I'm trying to say, and I do like to speak a little bit like this off the top of my head. What I'm trying to say is we're all in the same situation. We're all in the same pickle jar. We're all in the same difficult position. So we have to do the best we can. And the best we can is to face up to the facts and to take our decisions as best we can. I tell you, I do it myself. I'm frustrated. I can even say that I go through bouts of depression, momentary depressions, when I sort of think of myself and say, I haven't been out of London, let alone of the UK, for the last 6-7 months, with the exception of a couple of quick flits. And a lot of other people are in the same boat. So I go back to where I started. 3 things we have to do: wash our hands, use those face coverings, and apply physical distancing. And most importantly, coming hand in hand with these 3 basic, fundamental, rudimental, common sense moves, what comes with this is also something that is very important. That is personal responsibility. We have to be responsible for ourselves and responsible for others. I cannot do something which I know would endanger somebody else. I have a good friend of mine who used to come up to my flat twice or 3 times a week. And I used to do one of my, what I call the thick, dense Arabic coffees. Call it Lebanese, call it Armenian, call it Turkish, call it Greek, call it Cypriot, call it whatever you want. And we used to enjoy it because we used to have a half-hour break and have a chat and talk about different things. We don't do that anymore. Why? Because I'm concerned about myself and I'm concerned about him. I don't know. I mean, I seem to be healthy enough. He seems to be healthy enough, but one of us might be an asymptomatic carrier. And so we, I, he, everybody should apply common sense and responsibility. At the end of the day, we're not living on each of us on an island. We're all sharing the same island. Enough for today. So have a nice weekend. I think the weather would be nice, quite autumnal, but nice. So take care. And until, I suppose, number 34 at some stage next week.